Hello, welcome to today's episode of Creativity Boost Podcast. Today, we have a very phenomenal topic that we're going to be conversing on, and there's no better person to join me in this conversation than Alison Mullins. Before I bring her on to introduce herself, I'm going to tell you what we're going to be talking about, and that is mind mapping secrets for creatives. Have you ever wanted to know how to mind map or what mind mapping is actually all about? In this episode, in this conversation, you're going to find out all you need to know about it, and this is going to take your creativity to an astronomical level. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now, hi Alison, you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Well, sure. Hopefully, your listeners have heard a couple of our other episodes. I know last week it was a little difficult, but I am the owner of Rep Methods, which is a sales training company. I'm an author, and I'm working on my second publication in that adventure. And I'm also a career sales rep. So I actually do still work with the Quarry Group in Vicenza, Italy. And I work to help do sales for them in some geographical territories here in the United States.
Cool. Nice to have you on the show, and I'm super excited for what we're going to be unpacking in our conversation. To kick it off, do you want to tell us a bit about what you understand mind mapping to be about?
For sure. For me, mind mapping is a visual organization method in order to take your thoughts and get them in front of you so that you can mix them up and move them around and change things and begin to build that beautiful picture of what it is you're trying to create.
Wow, that's quite a very impressive definition. So, yeah, what benefit does mind mapping have for anyone, any individual who is trying to be creative?
Well, sure. I have a long history in the construction industry. I've worked for many, many years alongside amazing interior designers. Now, I am not a designer myself. However, my job over the years has been to influence and to spark interest into different manufactured products within that design and architecture segment. And I've been working in that career for the last 15 years almost. Mind mapping is not a new technology. It's been around for centuries. Think about if we go really way back and picture an archaic caveman who's trying to draw out directions on a sand floor or a dirt floor and using a stick in order to direct a person over the mountains and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. If you think about it, the art of actually drawing something out on paper in order to better explain and organize our thoughts is something that has been used for people way more intelligent than I am for centuries, Interior designers use mood boards. Mind mapping can be called a lot of different things, but the concept is still the same. It's pulling data together, things together, thoughts together, pieces of materials together, and putting it in front of you so that you can try to grasp an overall picture of what it is that we're creating.
Wow, that's amazing. So, being that mind mapping has been here for ages, it looks like it's still something that hasn't been fully harnessed, right? So, what is the thing that is making people not take advantage of this powerful tool that we have at our disposal?
Sure. You're definitely, I think people forget the process, and many of us are taught I remember being taught in like elementary school about making outlines. If you go back to perhaps a creative writing class that you had when you were in high school or secondary school, etc., Our teachers always taught us to write down the thoughts that we wanted to talk about in an outline perspective before we began putting that into the publication, right? Something as simple as that. And I think we forget our roots. I think I was actually on the phone on a Zoom call this morning with a good friend of mine. She runs a faith-based company here in Richmond, Virginia, and she was talking about writing her next book. We were both chatting about that. And she said she's just using Word, and she's just typing away and putting those thoughts down on paper, which is great. But how do we see the bigger picture? I think people just forget that sometimes laying it all out first would be the primary way to get a visual perspective of what we're trying to put together. I mean, think about a builder for a house. The builder doesn't just walk onto the property and start putting wood together, right?
That's the recipe for disaster.
That's a recipe for disaster. I mean, like, if you contracted a builder and that's the only thing, that was the next step after you put down a deposit, with them just coming out and kind of throwing your house together, whoa, I can't imagine what you're going to end up with, right? There's a significant amount of planning that goes into place. First, they have to survey the land, and you have to get the measurements, and then you've got to get a designer to kind of block out and place the different rooms within a house. And the same process is that's essentially a type of mind map.
Yeah, absolutely. And mind mapping is something that is kind of intuitive to some people, while for some other people it has to be intentional, it has to be trained, it has to be deliberately engaged in. And that's the reason why we are having this conversation, because we don't want to leave anything to fall through the cracks when it comes to your creativity. Another word for mind mapping is a mental putting together of different concepts, different precepts, different thoughts, different ideas in a way that they connect in a very fluid manner. And for me, before I write a book, I like to have that mental picture. In fact, beyond writing a book, before I create anything, before I solve any problem, I like to have a big picture overview of it. And there are some people that are not like that. There are some people that they don't care about the big picture. They just like to work on that small piece and then work on it before they discover they have another small piece. I'm not that kind of person. And for me, I feel to be creative, it helps to be able to visualize things in full before you even embark on it, because it reduces pain, it reduces waste, it reduces struggle, and it also helps you optimize for the best possible solution all the time. And like the illustration you gave about building a house, it's really profound. No builder would just go into a building site and start digging up a foundation, and you ask him, what are you doing? You say, I'm trying to build a house. I just know that I should do this first, maybe later we'll figure out what the house will look like. It's never done. In fact, the government will not give you an approval to erect a structure without a visual map of what that building is going to look like. So you want to tell us a bit about some of the secrets that you have found in your journey as a sales person, as a sales expert, because some people also think that mind mapping is only relevant in maybe writing a book or vision boarding or building a house. But you are a salesperson and you've seen value in mind mapping. So what are the secrets that you have seen that are applicable to your industry and any other industry?
Sure. I think first and foremost, the most simple mind map that I didn't even know I was creating was with a 30-day calendar. As a salesperson, in my really early days, I mean, we're talking about the first year I became an outside salesperson. This has nothing to do with inside sales, but this is when somebody hired me to be a business development manager and to go around and build traction for a manufactured product. And I had never done this type of work before. They just said, you're going to cover the state of Virginia. have fun. Here's a box of product. Go make sales. Now, what do you do? What do you do with that kind of like broad scope? I mean, for somebody like me, it was a challenge. I didn't know where to begin. And so the really earliest form of practice that I began to use mind mapping, besides the childhood outlines and writing papers and such, I didn't think of those as mind maps, was this 30-day calendar. And I remember having a desk in my house, and I bought one of those. I'm using my hands because I talk with my hands all the time, like a good East Coast New Yorker based person. So I have my desk calendar, and it's a 30-day like large desk calendar. And I looked at the calendar and I said, okay, I've got 22 working days, right? Because I don't work on the weekends. And I've got this territory. How am I going to decide where to go every day? So I started throwing cities on the days, because I knew, like, it was instinctual for me to know that I wasn't going to drive an hour and go to a city and then try to do more work at home or, in another city. So I was like, okay, cities, let's just look at geography and let me just throw these out there. So that was my first mind map. And I began to organize that way and then break it down into pieces from there. Because once I had sort of a plan, then I could go and start doing research on the businesses that I needed to see in those cities. So bada bing, bada boom, before you know it, I have an organized timeline of how I'm going to spend my month and who I'm going to try to see. And that, honest to God, Eric Duffy, that has been my guiding light in outside selling for years. Just creating a geography plan and working within smaller, drivable, reachable regions in order to maximize my time. Now, when I began writing the book for the art of selling, I didn't know about mind maps. Again, this wasn't something like I just mentioned. It wasn't on the forefront of my brain, but my coaching program started talking about it. And one of the ladies, we had sat on a personal call, and this is Alison in South Carolina, and she said, have you done a mind map? And I was like, what's a mind map? And she said, well, you've got all these topics, you've got all these things that you want to get into a book. Have you tried to organize them visually? And so I've actually got a video on my YouTube channel. I mean, I'm not trying to plug views. It's not about that. But go find that if you're really curious, because, man, when she gave me that idea, I think I set up a time-lapse camera. I set up my cell phone in the corner because I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, I've got all my stuff. Like, I know I know these topics. I'd already written classes. I'd already, written PowerPoint presentations, but I needed to get it into a book. And so I set up the camera in the corner, and I took this blank wall that's behind me. It's not blank anymore, but I used this wall right behind me, and and Post-it notes. In fact, I'm embarrassed to show you, but this is part of my second book right here.
Wow!
Look at all the Post-its. But I same process. I'm executing it this year, and I just started organizing first with chapters, with subjects, and placing them. And then my coach had me go back later and use a different color Post-it to add the stories that I wanted to tell within each segment, so that I could have some complete thoughts. And that way, when I was going to actually put the words on the paper, all I had to do was look up and be like, oh yeah, that's next. Oh yeah, that's next. And like bada bing, bada boom, it really, really helps build that creativity and that productivity, because I now have something in front of me that helps me visualize the outcome. I've got another story, but I'm gonna stop for a second and let you chime in.
Yeah. We can go on and on, because there's a lot of things to say, because this is something we do every day, even without knowing, right? And I want to just say something, because a lot of people think they are not creative. I've talked to many people in my coaching journey as a creativity coach, and people will tell you, oh, I don't think I'm creative, or they say, I don't feel I'm creative. And sometimes I try to help them. So if you know something, if you've learned something, anything at all, if you've lived in this world for a substantial time, you should know something. And the reason why many people don't think they are creative is because of the missing link that would help them connect their different bodies of knowledge together in a way that will produce something unique, right? So you know something, but you probably don't understand how they connect. You probably don't understand how they are relevant to each other. That's where creativity comes into play. And if you're not someone who leverages mind mapping, you may never be able to make those connections, because sometimes we don't even know those connections until we put them out in front of us and see that, okay, is there a pattern here? Because there's something about creativity that I like to talk about, and that is there's the design patterns of creativity. There are design patterns of creativity. There are patterns that you can, leverage when trying to create something. And so you would not be able to identify patterns in your thoughts, in your body of knowledge, in your skill, if you do not mind map, whether you're doing it with pictures, with post-it notes, with outlines, with anything, any way mind mapping works for you. So I'm saying this for someone listening to us right now. You have a body of knowledge, and you're wondering, how can I create? What can I create? How should I create? Well, the best way to answer that question would be to spend some time, doing an analysis, doing an intensive analysis of your ideas, of your knowledge base, of your skills, of your experience, of your stories, of anything that you have experienced in life, your education. All of these things are gifts that God has given to you that needs to be processed, right? So when you go plant a seed and you harvest some crop, you need to process it. When you go to the farm and you hunt, you need to process that food. You need to cook it. You need to roast it. And most people are like farmers who go hunting. They catch a game, they catch an animal, but they never roast it, they never cook it, they never process it. So they just let it rotten right there. So many people are going to the grave with their ideas unbirthed because they've not been able to connect that idea as a solution to a problem that already exists out there. Now, having said that, you want to tell me how you were able to map, because mind mapping is such a powerful tool. Another aspect of mind mapping is being able to map your skill, your idea, your education, your experience, your mess, being able to connect it and map it to an existing problem as the solution to that problem in the world. So how are you able to map your existing skills? You've told me your story in our previous conversations about how you got into sales, so I believe you'd have a thing or two to say about how you're able to map your story, your experience, your education, your family background to an existing problem and turn that into a creative solution.
Now it's like such a challenging question, because I'm not sure I'm the master of all that. I think first I want to touch on one major point I heard you digging into, which is that we can't process all of this creativeness and these thoughts and these ideas, that we can't process them without something like mind mapping in place. And that's 100% true, because, and I've learned this from my own experience, if you're a person who can have all of this data up here, all of it up here, and organize it up here too, you're special. Like you must be.
Absolutely, that's where genius is born.
you are a special person. I don't have that gift. And so for me, the idea of pulling things out of the brain and putting them down on paper, that process of just literally, getting it out, getting it written down, is the start to a formulation of a great mind map. Because it doesn't matter, any genius, any mathematician would tell you that it doesn't matter the order at which the ideas come out. What matters is that you put them somewhere that you can see them. And I think that this goes into, you mentioned like family. I mean, you think about genetics and family trees and being able to actually try to formulate and conceptualize the history of where we come from. Any good old fashioned bubble map on a piece of paper with a circle and a line coming down that might lead to a name or a structure, an organizational map for a business. All of those are examples of mind maps. But at the very core, we have to start with simply taking the ideas we have and putting them on paper. Now, for your listeners, I know in my history, one of the best ways that I began to collect the data to start my business was using an app on my phone that takes notes. Over the course of a year, we use that as the timeline. Over the course of a year, I was challenged with mentoring and managing younger salespeople. And at the same time, I was constantly being requested by owners of businesses and some customers that I saw on a regular basis that they wanted me to train their salespeople too. And so this was way before I had a business plan, prehistoric business opportunity. But I never would have gotten to the business plan or the opportunity had I not started taking those thoughts down. And so as I'm driving in the car and I would think of things like situations, stories, interactions, along the process of me training these people, I began to voice record, which would turn it into text because recordings are not as easy for me to process visually, so I need it to be in words. I need to actually be able to see the words. So voice to text, and I took notes. And I did this for a solid year. And so what began to formulate was these random thoughts, random pieces of data. If I was driving and all of a sudden I came up with like a fabulous like sales pitch idea, or I came up with a theory for structuring a program, and I started to kind of let my mind be free. There's no reason to try to organize it. I'm just getting my creative thoughts onto something tangible because I physically can't remember them later. Like if you asked me to tell you all of those thoughts today, there's no way I could recall that information. Sometimes my brain, it would just it could disappear as quickly as 5 minutes after I've gotten it down into a text format. So lo and behold, fast forward a year and a half, I did not intend on starting my own business. That wasn't where I was taking it. I was just trying to come up with ways to get all these thoughts out. But what was given to me later, and when the lightning bolt came through one Sunday morning and I began writing a business plan, guess what? I had, and I've got them here. For anybody who's curious, I just use the Samsung Note feature on my phone. But if you scroll through, this goes on for wow. Ages and ages and ages. And this is all the random thoughts. But at the same time, now I've got some things written down, and when it comes time for me to try to organize those, I've got pieces of the puzzle ready to put into a pictorial graph.
Wow, that is amazing. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge for you as a creative when you try to engage in a mind mapping session or in a mind mapping routine?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question? How do I start it?
Yeah, so what would you say has been the biggest challenge for you as a creative when you try to do some mind mapping?
Big challenge. You're tricking me with a good question here, because I think it's the process of knowing that the first time or the first mind dump is not all that's left. So, big challenge for me is leaving the mind map in place, walking away, and then I have to come back to it with fresh eyes. I would assume, I think a challenge is knowing that there's always more detail. There's never enough detail to continue to add to a mind map. There's no limit on how much you can break down a topic or break down a thought and continue to add more detail. And the more detail that is added, the easier it is for that to translate into something beautiful later on. For me, anyway. So I hope that answers your question. I was going to say, like, a challenge in teaching mind mapping is another story, but.
Wow. Yeah, that's another level. But we're just trying to help the average person who has not even understood the benefit of mind mapping, so that they can start taking advantage of it and they can start using that to manifest their creativity. There are many people who are heading to the grave with their ideas, with books unwritten, with songs unsung, with melodies in their head that have never been given expression because they have not been able to draw a mind map of their knowledge wells, their content ideas, that can help people, alleviate their pain and solve the problems that we find around the world. Because everywhere there's a problem, there's an opportunity. If and only if you can map your existing knowledge, skills, ideas as a solution to that problem, right? So with every problem, there's an opportunity to draw a map between where you are with your current knowledge, with your current experience and expertise to solving that problem. And that brings me to my next question.
Okay.
How would you say, mind mapping can be beneficial for business, right? Especially in the sales world. I know from my own limited understanding and knowledge of how the sales industry operates, a salesperson is concerned about closing sales, concerned about generating leads, converting those leads and whatnot. So how did you put mind mapping into this? I know you've said something about, your use of the calendar and whatnot, but taking it a step further, have you been able to use mind mapping in the area of the business side of things?
Yes, like all the time. And the primary function I came up with was an octopus diagram. Now, I haven't trademarked the octopus diagram, but it is in my book, and the content is published. So I'm going to call it mine because it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. But I used something called an octopus diagram. I came up with this because I was trying to translate how to teach someone to visually identify their best target customers. So this is specifically for selling. If a business or a person, and you've got to sell a product, the best way to start figuring out who is your target customer base, and I know you and I have done a podcast on UVP, is by identifying where we're going to find those clients. So I've got, this is on page 28 in the book. That's you can kind of see it here on the camera. Yeah,
for those who are listening.
For those who are listening or those who are watching the podcast, you can see this essential diagram is basically just some arms around a circle, because a salesperson is trying to pull in business and pull in sales and build clients and build revenue streams. So the octopus makes sense because they've got these tentacles that wrap their arms around their prey and bring them to the target. So writing down what it is that you offer and then brainstorming who do you identify is going to buy your products is like step number one in business. So I take that to a level of extremes whenever I'm working with private clients. I actually love to get big, 11 by 24 pieces of paper and put them on the wall of the octopus diagram and have a brainstorming session with my customers. If there's 5 people in the room, it doesn't matter if there's 3 people in the room, 5 people in the room, or one. The fact that you have someone to banter with and to talk about the different client opportunities, and then getting them on this diagram. And then even further, I was on Facebook this morning, and one of my previous coaching clients, she said in a comment, she said, "Oh yes, Alison, I channel you all the time." She said, "I've got octopus diagrams all over the wall," because I channel, these clients to then take, form a master, form the big picture diagram, and then use the same thought process to keep breaking it down into those smaller pieces. You can use it for networking, you can use it for advertising, you can use it for how you want to formulate new vendors. There's no limit on the amount of assistance that's available by simply brainstorming and putting your problem in the circle and putting your solutions or possible solutions in those exterior arms.
Wow, that's really cool, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because mind mapping is something that can be integrated into your business processes, into your brainstorming sessions. Mind mapping is different from brainstorming, but they can be used, in parallel.
In congruence, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, they should be used in congruence. I think brainstorming is a beautiful thing, and if you can even just find one other human being to sit in a room with you and help you pull out that data and information and get it onto some paper, that's a beautiful creative process.
Wow, excellent. I think that is really, really phenomenal, and I really, really love that we've been able to, unpack this conversation. I know there's a lot more to say about it, and in my future episodes, I'll definitely go into more detail. But I think that this is a good place to bring our conversation to a close. I want to also talk to you listening on the other side. Alison mentioned her book, and she drew up some quotes from there in her responses. The title of the book is The Art of Selling, and you'll find the link in the show notes or the description below. Yeah. So do well to grab yourself a copy, and you'll be glad you did. And so on this note, I would like to say thank you for listening through this episode. I believe you found some value, and I want you to talk to someone, your friend, your family, your loved one, about this episode on mind mapping. Share this episode, share this link. If you're just seeing us for the first time or just listening to this podcast for the first time, do well to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you're the first to know when a new episode drops. So I'll see you next week. Until then, have a good one.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Sir Duffy. Bye.